One other piece to know is how to learn and how to develop a skill. So when we're looking at diet, nutrition, and exercise and all this stuff, it's a new skill for you, right? This is all new. This is a new way of thinking. This is a new way of being. It's a new identity, which can be very difficult for people. I had a whole identity crisis video on my YouTube if you want to go and listen to it. You might find it useful. It can really work for any identity crisis, talking about how to overcome that, and some just simple talks that you can have with yourself to rework these identities in our mind and embrace our new identity and do it in our own way. Like, you don't have to do it the way Melissa does it. You do it the way you do it. And giving yourself that power and that freedom to design your own life and use your life as your blank canvas. So we start with learning. And this is a very important part. So when you are learning, and I probably should have put this in the very beginning of my slides, but when we're learning, you don't want to be all the way to the right and be naive and accept everything I say as gospel, right? And you don't want to be granite. You don't want to be so hard-headed in your mindset that you're not malleable and you're not willing to embrace or even consider new information or new data. So when we're on the path of research or learning or listening to a lecture, we want to be right in the middle, which is right in the middle of open-mindedness and critical thinking. So you want to take a thought into your mind, be open and minded enough to let it rattle around in there, come up with some critical thinking questions, make sure it makes sense, and continue, right? Take what you like and leave the rest. Okay, or take what is truth and leave the rest. Take what susses out, or take what funnels out into the end. And that's why I made this into a funnel, because our minds can be very powerful when we are focused on something. And this is the sweet spot for being focused, right? So if we're focused, if we're at a learning, if we're in between open-mindedness and critical thinking, right in the middle, we're not totally naive where we're believing everything that everybody says like an idiot, and we're not being the other idiot that's just so granite in there, no plasticity, no open-mindedness, no willingness to, I know everything. We're just balanced and in the middle. At that point, we can lean on our focus and become focused in the material and go to absorbing the material and working with the material. Then we move into knowledge and understanding of the material. Once we come into a certain level of knowledge, we do have to take action or practice. So you're working on a problem in math, you're practicing it on your own to make sure that you can work through the processes without assistance from the teacher, or working through a calendar like we had talked about, where you're time blocking and you're trying a bunch of different techniques for time blocking and time management. You have to take what the teacher says and what the teacher suggests, put it into your calendar, play with the blocks, and that requires action. And you keep going through these 3 steps until you gain enough experience and action to solidify it into wisdom. Okay, but we can't stay in this triangle all the time, right? This takes an immense amount of focus to be able to retain and absorb new information in this way. So we have to take breaks. Some of us are very strong processing units in our brains and don't have to take a lot of breaks, or take very limited breaks or very short breaks. Others of us are more hikers or off-road vehicles, or we like to take the scenic route and might have to take some more breaks in between all of these in this learning process, right? So I put on the outside of the focus are these other areas that can be done to help us with sleeping. There's walks, gardening, cleaning, ice baths, painting, writing, dancing, playing music, meditate, exercise, breath work, playing a sport, playing with your kid, Play-Doh. I talked to a teacher the other day. She gives all of her students Play-Doh. They're adult students. She puts Play-Doh on their desk, and she says, if you need a break, just start with the Play-Doh. Clay, some people really like to work with clay. Singing in new places are just some suggestions. I'm sure you guys can think of some more. Okay. Then we get into just clarifying some of these ideas. So ways to learn a balanced mind. So clear mind is the practice of the mind dump and calendaring all of your busyness in your head. So if you can't focus, you might have too many tasks rolling around in your head. So you want to get those out on paper and get them on your calendar before you do a creative project or a learning project. You want to have clear emotions. You want to have that balanced mind. You don't want to be too critical, and you don't want to be too open-minded, right? There's that spectrum where you want to be just right in the middle, and emotions can have an effect on that. You hear some new piece of information and get very angry. That is going to impede some of your ability to absorb the information and question it and work it through in your mind. If you hear some information and it makes you very sad, it might bring up some memories from your childhood or some trauma from your childhood. You might have to take a break and process that and work it through before you go back through the material in an open-minded and critically minded way, in a balanced way. So, ways to learn. So everybody is different. Learn how you learn, right? So I thought that I had to learn with pen and paper and writing. I thought and there is value in that. And I've gone through here a bunch of times and talked about how valuable pen to paper is. But I thought I had to learn in the classical way of sitting at a desk and listening to a teacher and not asking any questions. I just had a lot of ideas about how the proper way to learn was. And I didn't know that there were other ways. I didn't understand that there were other ways. There were other people that did things in other ways. And I didn't know that I was one of them that needed this. So as I went through high school, I absolutely hated it. I had a terrible time. I had one teacher that I liked, which was Jason Womack. And I learned an immense amount from him. And I knew that I could test out. So I did. I tested out of high school and I went right into college, and I wanted the flexibility of college. I liked the idea I could go to school whenever I wanted. I could choose my class times. There was no attendance. I could come and go as I pleased. And I liked the freedom of the structure of college. As I was in college, I still was having some problems with learning. And so I took a learning disability class. Not knowing that I had a learning disability, I had suspected that I did, and I think it was one of my counselors that recommended it to me, as I don't know exactly what I said to them, but I said something to a counselor and they recommended that I go to this learning disability course. And I did. And they went through and they had brilliant, doctorate level, accomplished people, business people as well, come into the class and talk about their stories of having disabilities, learning disabilities, and how they succeeded despite of them. And I really resonated with a lot of those stories. And then they had us take a test where we sat in a room, and I want to say it was about 10 different subjects. And they also, unbeknownst to me, they observe you while you take your test. So I'm over there fiddling with my pencil. Come to find out, I'm a kinesthetic learner. I use my hands. So I have to write notes as I listen. So I need to be fully engaged in order to pay attention to a lecture. I can learn through a lecture and through spoken word best, actually. Reading is not as dynamic for me. I need to learn through body language and through a person, and take notes as I go is the absolute best way for me to retain knowledge and the way my brain works. And I didn't know that. And it took me they made suggestions. That wasn't their only suggestion, but they said, people like you that have this learning disability, you might want to take breaks and stand up in the back of the class, or you might want to one of their suggestions was to take notes. And I had a coach that actually came and talked to me, and who made that suggestion, and it really worked for me. So learning how you learn, so you don't have to learn like everybody else does. And the other thing that Jason told me was that I told him, I was having all these problems with, he was telling me read a book, the whole read a book a day, or read a book a month, or read X amount of books a year. And I went, oh my God, I can't read. I mean, I can read, but it just takes so long. And I have such a hard time. He's like, there's audiobooks, there's podcasts, there's this. And I was like, oh, you're right. There's so many other ways to learn. I don't need to sit and read, because I would fall asleep. I'd try reading before bed, and my eyes, I have such a hard time processing. I mix up vowels in my brain, a certain level of dyslexia. And it takes so much for me to make sure that I'm reading the right word, if that makes sense, and reading the negative. Sometimes I don't read the negative, or I read it backwards. So in particular with medical literature, it's really hard to learn it in a book versus a lecture or an audiobook, because my brain gets it inverted. Like the sequences sometimes inverted. It's hard for me to come up with an example right now, but hopefully that makes sense. So I am again here for you as an example to say that do whatever works best for you for learning. Understand, then we go into practice, which requires action. So this is something that many people don't do, right? So a lot of people learn and acquire knowledge. I'm a fraud, that whole I'm a fraud thing, imposter syndrome. And I've certainly had that. I can relate. I think everybody has it. You think you need to know more. I need to know more before I can start teaching people. No, you know a lot. You need to start teaching people. There's always going to be somebody behind you, right? So just as in when you try to understand all of these things about diet and nutrition, at some point you have to take action. So the knowledge is here in hopes that it inspires you to take action for writing your own plan, for coming up with a strategy around calories and how to get enough protein, and coming up with a strategy on how to work on your mindset and come at your diet and nutrition from a place of love and care for yourself. And same with exercise. And then at some point you come into the mastery, experience, and wisdom. As you practice